Of this, we can all have a bit of a giggle and go, oh yeah, I remember when I was using my BlackBerry, I remember. We have a bit of a laugh about how often we change our phones. The profound part of this is unusual for the span of human history, of course. I mean, for most of human history, ideas, and BlackBerry is nothing more than an idea. It's the manifestation of an idea. For most of human history, well, first of all, for most of human history, stagnation, nothing changed. I'm talking about 1800s onwards with the Industrial Revolution, when things really started to change, started to pick up. But for most of human history, past the Industrial Revolution, ideas lived longer than people. So an idea would be conceived, or some people would say discovered, and then it would only slowly change through multiple generations. Slowly change and adapt through multiple generations. I mean, it was only not so long ago, you could have a marvellous career, 30-year career in an industry. Just learn the ropes of that industry, get promoted through the industry, learn the core ideas, the best practice of that industry, and never have to change a thing in that entire career. Now, of course, we're perhaps the first generation, or second generation, there's some millennials in the room, we're the first and second generations where people now outlive ideas. Meaning, in the span of a sort of 30-year career, you're having to change the core ideas, what you believe to be true in that industry, how it operates, how you deal with your members, your value proposition, your cost structure, your financial model, partners and suppliers you work with, all of those things. You're having to change those ideas at least every 10 years. And in faster-moving industries, it's maybe every 5 to 7 years. And now with the global pandemic, you had to change the core ideas of what you did to deliver value to your members. You had to change within weeks. Now, given this accelerated pace of change and how you had to react to the global pandemic and change some of your core ideas about how you deliver value to those members, and even post-pandemic, are we just going back to the same ideas that have been around at least 140 years in country clubs, or are you going to maintain and keep some of those new ideas of how to create value to your members? But the point is that change is accelerating. We all feel it, we all know it. Where are your tools as managers for helping people change? Helping people change the ideas they have of what a country club is, how a country club operates, how we arrange the resources in a country club. How do you help people change their ideas of those things when there's an accelerating and pressing need to do so? When I ask people what are the tools they need to talk about change, think about change, act on change, the one dominant tool keeps coming up. And it's not surprising, it's part of our Western culture. And that is, we change through conflict. It's massive. Think about it. If you've got a new idea, or one of your members, or somebody on the board comes in with a new suggestion, what has to happen? The new idea has to displace the old idea. In fact, we can't even talk about introducing new ideas until the current ideas are proven to be wrong, obsolete. Oh my goodness, we're losing members. Oh my goodness, we can't get any of the new generation to sign up. They don't see the relevance of clubs to their lifestyle. Oh my goodness. We can't have members visit the club. We have to think about some other way of keeping on delivering the value. So we never even think about introducing a new idea until the current idea is proven obsolete or wrong. So whenever you try and get a new idea or even talk about it, what happens is somebody sees it as a criticism of your existing way of operating, your existing way of doing things. So what happens? When that happens, they defend the existing status quo. They go, oh no, things are great at the moment. We've had our most profitable years ever the last couple of years. We've got people on a wait list to want to get in here. We don't have to do anything differently. So it's always, somebody is always going to defend the status quo, and maybe it's you, maybe you believe the status quo and things are working just great. So what happens is the person that wants to introduce a new initiative or suggestion has to attack the validity of the current idea by saying, well, this is always reasons why it doesn't work or it might not work in the future. And of course, the defender of the old idea digs their heels in further and we get all this wasted energy on clash, argumentative clash. It's such a waste of time and energy. So what happens is industries eventually do change. They always change the core ideas that dictate every action they're taking. They eventually change, but they change long after they could have been changed, which means they're leaving a lot of value and money on the table. So I'm here to talk to you today about changing the way you think about and talk about change in your clubs. If you're waiting for generational change to drive the shift that you're going to have to make, it's going to be too late. You're going to be backed into a corner and forced to change whether you like it or not. So of course, what we want to do is be proactive and change long before, or at least talk about change long before we need to change. Now, the first part of this discussion is starting to value ideas. We don't really value ideas, we value action. Just tell me what to do. I want the key takeaways. I want to take action. I mean, we're a pioneering culture here in America. We take action. But always remember that whatever actions you're taking are within an assumed boundary of what you believe is achievable and acceptable. And that assumed boundary is the metaphorical box that everyone likes to talk about. It's the limitations you're placing on the way you think about the way your resources need to go together. So, in this discussion, we're going to move away from actions and an idea is only valuable if it's executed and turns into a thing, a product or service. And we're going to talk about and value ideas just for their own sake. Now, this is a shift that is happening in the way we think about growing businesses and economies. And it's a recent shift. I say recent because an NYU professor just won the Nobel Prize at the end of 2018 for a theory called New Growth Theory. Now, if you Google New Growth Theory or endogenous growth theory, it's pretty boring stuff. Lots of abstract equations and charts and heavy math. Apparently macroeconomists win Nobel Prizes for heavy math. Who knew? But at its core, it has a very simple premise. And that is that the world of things, like the land your clubs are sitting on, like the golf carts that you have, like the cars you have, the desks, the tables and chairs in the restaurants, that's the tangible world. That's your investment in tangible assets. The other side of the equation is your investment in intangible assets, the world of ideas. The world of things and the world of ideas don't work the same way. But in management, we're still treating them in our businesses and the way we think about growth in the same way, which is a dreadful mistake. So think about this theory in terms of something you'll take for granted right now, a chair. Right, you're all sitting in a chair, you're probably not thinking about it too much. Somebody gives me a chair right now and says, Luke, sit down. You look tired. I say, oh, thanks, this is fantastic. Now I can sit down. This tangible thing meets my use and need and I'm a happy man. Fantastic. Now, imagine if somebody comes up and gives me a second chair right now. Not as valuable as the first, right? What am I going to do with the second chair? Absolutely nothing. Maybe I could put my feet on if I thought hard enough about it. The other thing about this chair, I'm the only one who can use it. Nobody else can use it. I'm the only one who can use it. So this is known as a rival good. Only one person can use it as a time. And this is something that all tangible goods share in common. This is why usually, except it's a bit unusual at the moment, the more something is consumed in the physical world, the faster it depreciates. It loses value. This is why usually you don't pay as much for a used car as you do for a new one. Everything in the physical world works this way. So all the tangible assets that you have to manage work this way. But what I want to think about today is the idea of a chair. Of course, we never think about the idea of a chair because it was invented so many millennia ago, nobody even thought about it. This is my favourite chair in the world. This is the Eames recliner. This was introduced to the world in 1954. Now, in 1953, the designers, Ray and Charles Eames, took all the resources and knowledge that were available at the time in 1953, and they sought a new arrangement of those resources and knowledge. They created the idea for the Eames recliner. Now, once that idea is established, Herman Miller, the manufacturing company, can manufacture the idea. Of course, they've been manufacturing the idea for over 60 years. Now, I want to use a metaphor which is more helpful. Think about ideas as the recipes you use in your clubs to rearrange things to create new value and wealth. The recipes. So in 1953, the designers Ray and Charles Eames took all the ingredients that were available, sought a new arrangement of those ingredients, and created the recipe for the Eames recliner. Now, once that recipe is established, Herman Miller, the manufacturing company, can cook the recipe. And Herman Miller's been cooking the recipe for over 60 years. Now, of course, if I've got an Eames recliner at home, the more I use it, the faster it degrades in value. Wears out. I won't be able to sell it in 2 years for what I bought it for the last 2 years. And if I've got an Eames recliner at home, I'm the only one who can use it. Nobody else can use it if I'm using it. But the idea of the Eames recliner. Everyone in this room can use the idea of the Eames recliner. Of course, you can take that idea and you can combine it with your ideas, because everyone's ideas and experiences and beliefs in this room are different. So the combinatorial mathematics explode the number of possibilities there are for combining this idea with other ideas. And it even gets better than that. A recipe locks ingredients in place. So once that idea or recipe is fixed, all that knowledge and resources are also fixed. Once you break apart an idea or a recipe, those ingredients, those resources, those knowledge, are free to be rearranged in an alternative way. So there's a big difference between the world of things, where the more something's consumed, the more decreasing value, and the world of ideas. The more people you have, the more conversations you have in your clubs with your members about new ways to combine knowledge and resources, i.e., come up with new recipes, the more conversations you have, the more subject the club is to increasing returns. Because every idea is an option. It's an option on your future. It's a new way of creating value. So in the world of things, there are limits. There are limits to growth. There's only finite resources. We have to be incredibly strategic with how we use those resources. In the world of ideas, there are no limits to growth. There are no limits to how you can think about growing the value to your membership. No limits. Because all it is a willingness to seek a new arrangement of what is currently available. Seek a new arrangement that's going to make those ingredients, whether it's your value proposition, whether it's your members, whether it's the relationship you have with your members, whether it's the key communication channels that you use to have that relationship with your members, the partners and suppliers you depend on, the activities that you do as a club to keep that club going, the cost structure, the revenue model. All of those things are ingredients that can be remixed in an infinite number of ways to grow the value of your clubs and membership over the next 5 to 10 years. So the most important part of this discussion is the idea that growth for your clubs over the next 5 to 10 years is going to come from better recipes, not more cooking. And for me, this is a fundamental question to ask when you've got the opportunity to actually get out of the day-to-day busyness of actions. You're all here. One of the amazing things about an association like this is it brings you all together. The opportunity to mix ideas and talk about these different ideas, different ways you could do things, different ways you could bring ingredients together to create new recipes. That opportunity is profound. But it's also fleeting. Before you know it, you'll just be back into the normal pressure of just having to cook the recipes you've already been using. Now let's talk about where these recipes came from. It's worth reflecting on the recipes you're currently cooking, whether it's the recipe of the initiation fee, whether it's the recipe of the annual dues, whether it's the literal recipe of what's on your restaurant menu and how members interact and dine with you and socialise, whether it's the recipe of the facilities and the recreational activities that you provide. Where did these recipes actually come from? Like most industries, they were invented in a different age, different time. Like most industries, they were invented by somebody else in a different context completely. Now, we're not going to go through a long history, and I'm sure you know it better than me, but, I was thrilled to discover that, contentiously maybe, the first club in America was the Philadelphia Cricket Club. I'm Australian. We're obsessed with cricket. I couldn't believe there was cricket clubs here. And of course, this was in 1854. Do you know why there were cricket clubs here? I've never met an American who knows anything about cricket. Nothing. I know nothing about baseball. I get it. But why is there cricket clubs? Well, because we were trying to imitate the English, the British. The British had their little, country houses, they were called at the time. And the well-to-do Americans in the New World basically wanted, a country house with better manners and everything, like a bit of exclusivity, like the British. So the original recipe was set up to recreate what they'd experienced in England at the time. Even though, of course, we were trying to get rid of the shackles with England. And then, after the Philadelphia Cricket Club, we have the Brookline Club, Massachusetts. I still have trouble saying that with my Australian accent. Perhaps the first US country club, 1882. So we're looking at recipes that are established, and by the way, if you look at what they were providing back then, services and recreational facilities grew, but it was still the same business model. Dues, initiation fee, membership, exactly the same business model. So this recipe was created 140 years ago. 140 years. Now, does that mean it's a bad recipe? Absolutely not. Does that mean it's the best recipe? Absolutely not. We often believe that just because something's been around a long time, it's the best. It's the best recipe, the best way of doing things. Because we think that it's been, constantly shaped and it's evolved to become better and better over time. And we think there was logical reasons, for each of those changes. But what we forget is historical contingency, meaning the sequence of time and chance. I had a demonstration to show you today, but we had some tech problem. So I was going to show you something on a camera, but I'm going to have to describe it. When you think about how recipes were established, path dependence comes into play. Now, path dependence is something that happens with all businesses, meaning we're fantastic at setting up paths for the business to follow. Like, these are the recipes we're going to cook. Let's get everyone aligned and cooking and grow. Fantastic. Fantastic at setting up these paths. And then everything that comes along after our setup, we just add on to the existing recipes. So they just get added to the path that we're on. So any capabilities that you think you need now to add to be competitive in the future will get added to the capabilities you currently possess as a club, as an institution. Any knowledge that you think you're going to need in the future gets added on to the knowledge that you already have. Any investments you think about making in your tangible infrastructure get added on to the tangible infrastructure that you already have. This is path dependence. But what we forget is, in 1882, there was a bunch of knowledge and resources around for how to do what we wanted to do, which is get a community of people together. So we arranged that knowledge and resources in a particular way and created the idea of a country club. Now that idea gets fixed, and then it just drifts through time, and everything gets added onto it. There are new ingredients available today in 2022, 140 years later. There are new ingredients on the table. But if you're only cooking from the traditional recipe book, written in 1882, or even 20 years ago, that traditional recipe for how you manage and run a country club and organise it and put it together, weren't asking for any of these new ingredients that are available today. So the problem with traditional recipes is they're not asking for any of the new ingredients to be included. So the ideas that you have around your club, the ideas your members have at the club, constantly need to be challenged and changed in order to bring them up to date, to allow you to extract maximum value from the newer knowledge, the new ingredients that are available. So path dependence is something that we all suffer from. Oh, and by the way, the only things that knock us off a path are things like the global pandemic, where you had to react really quickly and quickly change your ideas. Or when a competitor comes into your space and does something different and it starts to make your model look obsolete or irrelevant and you start to lose members. Basically, you're forced into a corner or crisis mode. We love management by crisis. Isn't it amazing the energy that comes out in a crisis? All of a sudden, people are thinking out of the box, they're creative. We're thinking about, oh my goodness, people can't come to the club, so we have to go to them. I heard stories about clubs making deliveries to people that couldn't travel. I heard stories about people driving to the club, opening their trunk, dinner gets put into the trunk, they drive it back home. This is creative stuff, which happened in a crisis. So crisis forces this stuff upon us. It's the only time we're forced off the path. Part of disruptive leadership is doing the work of crisis without the crisis. How can you keep this same sense of creativity and energy going in your clubs with what you manage, regardless of if there's a global pandemic or a generational change or shift of values, regardless of those things? So here is a way of thinking about the need to keep your existing ideas going, but also constantly be having a dialogue, a discourse around new ways of doing things. This is perhaps the biggest challenge that any of you have to manage. You have to keep the existing status quo going. You've got to keep your existing members happy. You've got to keep the facilities running, keep the business model cranking, but at the same time, you have to be building the future of the club. What's the future membership look like? What do the future services look like? You have to be doing that simultaneously. And this is the biggest dilemma in business and management. And hardly anybody is doing it well. Because it's a really tough thing to solve. You might have heard the metaphor. How do you change aeroplanes in an aeroplane when it's in mid-air? That's the metaphor. So how do you change things in your club when you've got to keep everything running? I mean, most clubs shut down for 1 month a year just for maintenance. That's hardly enough time. You can't change everything in that month of February. So how do you do both of these things at the same time? Which brings me to the wheels. Now, I won't get you to do this now. I like to get physical with it because it's a bit embarrassing. But when you get back to the hotel room, get in front or home, get in front of the mirror and just start spinning these arms around in front of you. One of them's going in a clockwise direction. This is the system that you've got to keep running. And the other is spinning in the opposite direction. You've got to have both of these wheels or plates, if you like, spinning at the same time. It's a bit like this whole thing. So. Now, incremental leadership is about spinning this first wheel. It's about keeping this running, keeping your existing value proposition running, keeping your existing cost structure running, your revenue model, keeping the existing membership happy. This is all sustaining, or what we call sustaining leadership or incremental leadership. And everyone in this room is fantastic at that. I'm not worried about anybody's ability in this room to be good at that. This is what got you into the room in the first place. This is why you got promoted into these positions. This is what 98% of what we do at a business school is about this. However, if you're only growing through incremental change, so getting better at cooking the recipes you're already using, that is unstable. If you want to grow in a stable way, and this is one of the myths of disruption, we think it's creating instability. It's not. If you're in a system, and you are, every business institution is a system. Everyone you employ is in this system, this hamster wheel, employed to keep it running. Grow through continuity. If you're only growing through continuity, the continuity of what you're doing, it's unstable. A system needs a counterbalance. And in terms of change, that counterbalance is introducing ideas that would be inconsistent or in direct conflict with what you're currently doing. Do you have a mechanism for having a dialogue, a discourse around ideas that might be inconsistent or in direct conflict with how you currently run things? So you can think about this wheel as dominant ideas. The dominant ideas organise our people. Everything we're running around doing is because we're organised around a set of dominant ideas. Dominant ideas about the membership structure, the fees that they have to pay, the way we run the golf course. These are all dominant ideas. But in order to grow in a sustainable way and make sure that your clubs are relevant the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you need to introduce that counterbalance. You need to introduce disruptive ideas on a regular basis and have a discourse around those ideas. If you don't have this mechanism for taking the dominant ideas and feeding them into some sort of challenge process where you can challenge them and then feed the results back, you're just going to be caught, backed into a corner in crisis mode. So that's the value of disruptive ideas. It changes the conversations you're having with your members and with everyone on your management team, with everyone you manage. Now, this change in conversation is what we call a dynamic discourse. Static discourse is where you're just talking about the same stuff in every meeting you have. Every time you get together with your members to update them, you're just talking about the same stuff. Incremental changes were made to this, this, and this. A dynamic discourse is where you're getting together deliberately with the intention of changing the way you talk to each other about where the club's going and what its future is. What are the new members that we want? Is the membership structure going to be sustainable in the next 20 years? Changing the way the terms you use, the language, the vocabulary, everything you think about a club, you're deliberately challenging. Now, where I went before with, ideas are only valuable if they get turned into something. So we have to execute. Have you heard the saying, ideas are cheap, they're free. I have 1 million of them a day. They're only valuable once they turn into a product or a service. That's thinking about ideas over here for their use, their utility. The ideas that I want you to be sharing, the disruptive ideas that might be inconsistent or direct conflict with what you're currently doing, most of those ideas will not get implemented. They won't. Does that mean they're a waste of time? No, because it's not about their use value, it's about their option value. Every disruptive idea that you build a dialogue around in your club, with your membership, if you're keeping a file of those ideas, a portfolio of those ideas, it's building your club's optionality. So if circumstances change in your future, which they will, so if the millennials come by and they're all of a sudden completely not interested in country clubs at all, don't buy into the exclusivity argument, not interested in the recreational activities or whatever it is where you're competing right now, if the millennials aren't interested, you have another option to switch to, because you've discussed it, you've had a dialogue, you've run some mini experiments around it. You have the option to exercise. Now, every time that you guys talk about a disruptive idea, it is never meant to be a criticism of what you're currently doing. You're just putting the new idea up against the old idea for the purposes of having a dialogue, a discourse around the differences between those two ways of operating. But it is never seen as a criticism. Why? Because you never want a new idea you never want to wait till the current way of operating is proven to be wrong before you can start a discussion around a new way of operating. If you have to wait until the current way of doing something is obsolete or wrong, it's going to be too late. Now, when the timing's right, you and the club will be able to switch over to the new way of operating. You have that option to exercise, as I said before. And that new world will start spinning around that new way of organising. If you think about it, a quick example of this, everyone loves Apple and what they were doing. They used to be in computers, that was their dominant idea, that was driving their growth. We'll skip the early history. Steve Jobs came back. He said, I want to have a go at music. Started spinning the iPod around as a disruptive idea. Every time they had a discussion around the recipe for the iPod, it provoked strategic introspection. Are we still a computer company? What relationships? Do we need new partner and supplier relationships to get into the music industry? So that discussion started to get them off their path to dependence. Once the value of the iPod recipe proved itself, and the timing was right, it got through the gate and started driving their business. Then what did they have spinning over here? Well, he said, I want to have a go at telecommunications. We're going to do a phone. So the recipe for a phone was spinning around in there. Every time they had a discourse and a dialogue around the phone recipe, challenged their current identity. It challenged them to think, oh my God, do we have the right executive team for this? Maybe we need to go and get somebody with expertise in this particular area. Maybe we need to form these new partnerships. Once the timing was right, the phone moved in to drive the system of continuity and that hamster wheel of growth. And they could incrementally improve that. And it goes on and on. The watch started spinning around as a disruptive idea. They're having a go at a car. Everybody seems to think they can make a car. That's spinning around that wheel. But the important thing is the dynamic discourse that these disruptive ideas provoke. Now, as I said before, if you have to wait for generational change to make this happen, it'll be too late. There is always a shift in value and preferences for generations. We've had entire conferences for the last decade freaking out about the millennials. Any millennials in the room? Probably a rude question. All right, well, okay. I want you guys to know we've been having conferences behind your back. So we'll fill a room like this, freaking out like you're aliens that have just landed on planet Earth from outer space. They don't want to drive a car, they don't want to... I don't know what to do with these people. You guys are going to have conferences around Gen Z. We're already freaking out about Gen Z and the changes there, and their attitudes towards work. Goodness knows what their attitudes towards, country clubs are going to be. And now, does anyone know what this new generation is? We ran out of letters in the Greek alphabet, so we're going back to the start. This is alpha. 1 to 4-year-olds, maybe 1 to 5-year-olds now. If anyone's seen a little 1-year-old pick up a phone or a tablet, it's incredible. They don't need an instruction manual. Watch this little girl. We're meant to have sound, but who knows? Watch the way she's interacting with an iPad and what happens when she goes back to using a traditional magazine. Oh yeah. I want you to notice that. So she's convinced that her finger's not working, so she decides to test it on her knee. That's not my daughter, by the way. I do have young daughters, but they're way cuter than that. I saw a guy. This isn't just for 1-year-olds either. I saw someone on a middle-aged guy down on the subway system, and he had an old-fashioned newspaper, and he was on the phone, so I think he was distracted. He started going, swiping across it, and then realised what he was doing. He looked around, embarrassed. So generational change, there will be a shift of values. It happened with the fast food industry and that. It always creates a gap. This is what happens. There's a shift in generational preferences and behaviours. And the existing incumbents don't want to change. Their business model's working just great. So it creates a gap. And this is what entrepreneurship's all about. Entrepreneurs race in to fill the gap. It's happening with fast food, and the gap was created where the values of the millennials didn't sync with the fast food model. So a gap was created, and the idea, the recipe that filled the gap was labelled smart casual restaurants sprung up, Chipotle and all the rest of it, created that gap. So there will be a gap created by this millennial change, the Gen Z change, the alpha change, and there will be gaps created. You know, the question is, are you guys actively, proactively looking to fill those gaps? Do you have the optionality to fill the gaps, or are you going to let entrepreneurs come in and close those gaps? Now, we have some time to actually get into, Beth, we've got 15 minutes left, and then I think we've got some Q&A. I want to leave you with some key takeaways for how to actually change this discussion in your clubs and start to get it going. Now, there is a process for spinning this wheel, spinning the disruptive idea wheel. It starts with making a disruptive hypothesis. So this is where, to piggyback on the presentation you heard this morning, these are your what-ifs. Your disruptive hypothesis are your what-ifs that you should find a way to discuss at least twice a year with either your members or with your leadership board. I'm not sure how each club is describing it. Each one describes it slightly differently. Some are equity owned, some are non-equity. So whatever those meetings or discussions are, you need to include some time for disruptive hypotheses. And then you work your way through the process where you're actually shaping those into a solution. But what I want to get through in the time that we have is I want to give you this takeaway of creating disruptive hypothesis. And this can help start to change the conversation you're having with each other at this conference. So with incremental leadership, we always look to make a reasonable prediction of what's going to happen next. This is what a regular hypothesis is. If this remote control wasn't working, I'd make a reasonable prediction that the battery was flat. So what do? I test it. I change the battery. If it still doesn't work, I have to form another prediction and test again. Now that's great for continuing down the path you're already on, which at the moment is a successful path. Fantastic. But there's absolutely no guarantee that what worked in the past is going to be what made you successful in the future. So we need to get out of the habit of only making predictions and into the habit of making provocations, unreasonable provocations. And that's what disruptive hypotheses are. They're deliberately unreasonable what-ifs. So here are 3 ways of looking at the dominant ideas that you currently use. What are the dominant interaction ideas that you use in your club? How many times do you expect members to use the club? Are they coming in twice a week? Are they coming in 3 times a week? You'll know the average. How are they using the club? Are they primarily using it for golf? If you're a golf club, are they primarily using it for the restaurant or the social activities? What are the dominant ideas around how we think of our membership and their interaction with us? Now, here's a simple example. Rental cars. You have to have face-to-face interaction with a service agent, complete a lot of paperwork, and they rent your vehicles by the day. This has been around forever. Started to change recently, but this is primarily the business model. So once you've got that list of dominant ideas for how you expect your members to interact with what you're offering, I want you to deny some of those dominant ideas. Just take them out. What if we didn't offer golf? What if there were no restaurant? Whatever your dominant ideas are that is driving your current business model, deny these things. Negate them. Now, of course, it doesn't mean you're going to stop doing them, but it means that you're going to create a thought experiment around it. So if we never offered golf, how would we still deliver value to these members that primarily come here to play golf? And you creatively start to have a dialogue, have a discourse around other ways you could create value for those members. Often the dominant ideas, because they have such a strong organising effect, they organise completely the way we perceive the current way we do things. So you have to get rid of these dominant ideas. So if we see the customer complete a lot of paperwork, rent cars by the day, we don't see the customer, there's absolutely no paperwork and no cars available by the day. And this, of course, was Zipcar. No matter how absurd an idea seems at first, I promise if you think about it long enough and have that discussion and dialogue around that idea, unexpected advantages will start to reveal themselves. Advantages that might reveal opportunities in latent assets. We all have latent knowledge and assets that just we're not extracting maximum value from at the moment. That latency will start to reveal itself. The second filter is, think about your offering. You can think about it as a service, you can think about it as a product. What are the dominant product ideas? What are the dominant features and attributes of our club, of our dining experience? What are those dominant attributes and features? What are the cliche areas in which we say we compete? Imagine something as simple as soda. If I had a can of soda here, how much would you expect I paid for this can of soda? $1.50 or something. Anyway, it's inexpensive. If there was an alien from outer space here, or a millennial, assuming they had taste buds and they never tasted soda before, what would you tell them it's going to taste like? It's going to taste typical soda. Sweet. And if you saw an advertisement of it, what would the ad look like? There's always typical soda ads.
Young, fit, healthy.
Yeah, young, fit, sexy, healthy people frolicking on a beach somewhere, drinking copious amounts of the fizzy stuff. Coke wrote the rule book on aspirational advertising. Literally spent millions convincing the world, this is not sugared water. It's the American way of life, on a beach, in a can. So soda's inexpensive, it tastes sweet, it's advertised as aspirational. Now you'll notice these are so obvious, you'd almost be embarrassed writing them down, but this is exactly the point with dominant ideas. Dominant ideas are not explicit, usually. You probably don't even have them written down. But I guarantee dominant ideas are below the surface. They're below the surface of how you think about everything, the way everything's meant to be done in the club. The way all those resources are meant to be arranged are through dominant ideas. They're a subconscious level of awareness. So what I want you to do with these product ideas is invert them. This is heading down the path in the opposite direction. So whichever way you're going now with your product, go the opposite direction. So if something is free, make it expensive. If something's expensive, you could think about making it free. I'll talk about price more in a second. If something's scarce, think about making it abundant. If it's abundant, think about making it scarce. If it's exclusive, think about opening it up to everybody. If it's open to everybody, think about exclusivity. You get the idea. If we go back to soda, it's inexpensive, tastes good, it's advertised aspirational. Wow, what if it was expensive, tasted bad, and we stop telling people it's going to change their lives and make them happy? We just tell them it's going to give them a functional boost of energy when they need it. This, of course, was Red Bull. Took a formula that nobody liked. American consumers were spitting on the floor in the focus groups. Oh, that's nice. Little Basil Hayden there. Anyway, they took a disadvantage and turned it into an advantage, which is the whole point. It's easy to think about what are your weaknesses that you have to, as managers, turn into strengths. What are your friction points that you have to get rid of? It's harder right now to think about your strengths and thinking about those as weaknesses. But I encourage you to do that because they could become weaknesses in the blink of an eye. Same as Blockbuster thought, their gazillions of physical stores were their strengths, turned out to be a weakness, prevented them from seeing the future of streaming. Finally, this is a big one for you guys, huge. What are the dominant ideas around pricing? The initiation fee, the annual dues, everything that goes into that whole membership structure. The tiers. Just about every club follows the same tiering strategy. There is so much room for innovation in how you price these offerings to open it up to completely new customer segments.
or make it more exclusive, whatever you want to do. Why have socks always been packaged, priced and purchased in pairs? Because we've only got 2 feet. That's a really good reason. All dominant ideas are around for a good reason, meaning they were justified at one point in time, and in fact they might still be a good idea. But remember, it's the very strength of the idea that keeps it protected. The fact that you're doing well right now, if you are in your club, is protecting the idea. Nothing should be protected from challenge. Nothing is too sacred that it can't be done in a different way. I used to work with a guy who was sick of working with big projects at Frog like Disney and HP. He wanted to do something small. So he started thinking about, he was out to dinner one night thinking about socks. And somebody said, it's so boring that socks have always been sold in pairs. What would happen if we started selling socks in sets of 3? Now, everyone thought this was the dumbest idea they'd ever heard in their life. Why? Because somebody's there, probably with an MBA, thinking, the market for 3-legged people is really small. So it doesn't take much to criticise a new idea. But he thought there was something in this. So he thought, well, while we're at it, we're going to break another cliche. If we're doing 3 socks, they don't have to match. So he started handing out samples and figuring out who would be interested in 3 socks that don't match. And he found out that 8 to 12-year-old girls love socks that don't match. They just love mixing stuff up because they're at this awkward age between, a child and an adolescent. Self-expression and dressing themselves becomes super important, and they're not going to wear matching socks if they don't want to. So self-expression was key. So he created a little character called Little Mismatched, and they started selling mismatching pajamas, furniture, toys. They got a big round of VC capital of, a small round if you like, 20 mil. And sold the company within 5 years. Made 4 millionaires of the people out to dinner that night. Not bad off the strength of one disruptive hypothesis. Now, what was the problem they solved? There wasn't one. We're all so obsessed with putting out fires. I bet 98% of your job is solving problems and putting out fires. The problem with problems is they're screaming for your attention. So when you leave this conference, it's not about putting your attention back to the things that you need to fix and you already know about. It's about directing your attention and other people's attention towards the areas in your club, in your business, where absolutely nothing appears to be wrong. Disruptive thinking is about paying attention to what's not obvious and what's normally ignored. Disruptive leadership is about directing other people's attention to those areas, because where attention goes in your club, energy flows. If you're only paying attention to what's working, where your revenue is coming from right now, all your energy is going into maintaining that offering, that membership, etc., etc. And you'll be backed into that corner in crisis mode if it changes. So this is about changing the way you think and talk about change. There's never been a more exciting time to be thinking about new recipes in your club right now. It's about moving away from only pursuing high probability suggestions and ideas to thinking about how can we find a way to discuss and experiment with more low probability ideas, initiatives and suggestions. It's about moving away from being obsessed with return on investment, ROI, to an equal obsession with ROL, return on learning. Every time we build a dynamic discourse and dialogue around disruptive ideas, we're going to learn something. That is the value of these discussions and ideas. And then finally, if you've got people working for you, how are you going to reward effort for the contribution of new thinking, new ideas, new suggestions for the success and future of the club, rather than only rewarding result? We're only going to reward you if this turns into something tangible, something that we can sell. As I said before, most of the ideas, suggestions you're going to get are not going to be implemented. So how do you keep people motivated to keep fresh thinking, an injection of fresh thinking into the club? Never been a more exciting time again for you to be thinking about these things. So enjoy the possibilities. Thanks, guys. Privilege to spend time with you today.